that, and then we can.
Hey, Herb, notice that the only words on Andy's shirt that you can read are discipline. I'm not sure if that's a subliminal
Discipline equals
message.
freedom. That's what you see.
Oh, discipline equals freedom. Nice.
Yeah, feel free to ask what that means.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
All right. Well,
I think that's an Alabama perspective of freedom.
It is not actually. Discipline equals freedom is from an author that I really enjoy, Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, who wrote a couple books that I think one of them is right there, about extreme ownership. If you've ever heard of that, is a pretty awesome leadership topic that I'm very, very familiar with and learned a lot from.
Excellent.
So, well, thanks guys for being on. We're now live on YouTube as well. Today we are talking about food halls, which is a very complex topic, and I have a couple of very smart people here to help talk about that. Herb, let's start out with you. Can you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are.
Of course, Andy. Thank you for having me on, and I appreciate it. So I'm Herb Heiserman. I'm one of the managing principals of StreetSense. StreetSense is a kind of unique and uncommon collaborative of creative individuals, and we've come together over the last 10 years to develop a sizable consultancy based in Washington, D.C. and in Los Angeles, and really center ourselves around the consumer experience. And a lot of the work that we do is in the food and beverage industry, hospitality. And it's really a collaborative of everything from food and beverage operators and chefs to interior designers, to architects, to marketing individuals, and really is a unique platform. And excited today to talk with you and with Andrew about the concept of food culinary collections, what we're calling food halls these days. And my specific contribution to that is we've designed many of them over the last 3 or 4 years and been involved in the sort of planning and real estate strategy of them as well. And I think it's a hot topic. It's something that needs a lot of exploring, as I have been on record as saying many have been perspective and thought of and even built that probably shouldn't have. And I think we'll go down that path and how we can get them to succeed. And I'm excited about today's conversation. So
awesome. Andrew, who are you?
I wonder that every day, but I am first and foremost a chef who is part of a group called Resolute Consulting, which is with you, Andy. And then I own a culinary development agency in Los Angeles, and we focus on restaurant development, food products for retail, and then we also have a niche in agriculture. And what that means is we work with growers primarily in the US, but also in Canada and Mexico, and helping them understand the food service and retail marketplaces and how to grow and then potentially process their crops to be beneficial or attractive to food service operators. So a quick example is I have a client in Mexico who grows eggplants, and 20% of those eggplants he sells for top tier pricing. And then everything else, after that top 20%, the price goes down almost to cattle feed pricing. And so how do we help him take those ugly vegetables, ugly eggplants or mushrooms or tomatoes or cucumbers, are all things that he grows, and turn them into something that's interesting and he can fetch a lot more money for. So, but also I'm excited about talking about food halls, and my sort of area of expertise is curating who goes into the food hall and then mentoring them, because for a variety of, I think, inherent reasons, chefs and business people that want to go into food halls oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes need mentorship. So we'll talk more about that.
Yeah, that's a good summary. today, the food hall topic, there's a lot involved. We're going to start out with kind of what we're classifying as a food hall to kind of clarify what that means. There's kind of three things that we decided to try to take away from this. Is first of all that we acknowledge the fact that there's a bunch of great food halls. They're awesome places to be. But we feel like there's some structural difficulties with the way that their business model works, as well as how they're physically set up, and there's basic problems. While the pandemic certainly has caused a lot of that to come out and be more more in your face, like a number of other things in our industry, these were problems that were already there and really need to be addressed. The other factor is that there's, while there's a list of pretty specific problems that I feel that I wrote the article about, that I think that I posted prior to this, that there are also solutions to those problems, and they're just not easy to adopt, but it takes a different way of thinking and perhaps a different way of executing to make those happen. And the third point is that all of those things are possible basically only through great leadership. And how that leadership is applied to this particular venue is not an easy thing. You've got to, what I always say when people ask me about food halls, the best part of food halls is that they're a group of individual, awesome, unique operators. That's also the most difficult part of the model as well, that there are a bunch of great individual folks that don't necessarily understand that this is a singular environment, that we're trying to create a great guest experience throughout the entire thing. And it's and the difference between that and maybe a food court. So those are kind of the three topics of that. Maybe Herb, maybe you can start with saying, how would you define a food hall?
Well, thanks.
And quickly.
Yeah, I'll do it quickly. So I think there's a couple different ideas to that. I think you touched on a really smart one, is that it has to be a differentiated collection of culinary offerings, and those need to be at a height of a level. I think food hall came about as an elevation of a food court. Food court became an elevation of a neighborhood market, if you will. And something that you had to have because it offered a reward to a consumer in a retail environment. And now with the level of culinary elevating in our entire world and becoming the center of our lives over the last 10 years, that it needs to be a collection of unique offerings, and it also needs to be a collection. So these ones that have popped up that are 3 or 4 vendors, artists, if you will, I don't believe really gives the energy and the vibrance of what the old market used to be. And this should be a gravity in the community where people can come to and experience food and other events, if you will. So to me, it's, I can't throw a number, it's 15, it's 12, 15, as many as 20 different operators that are supporting a community and offering their artistry. So that to me is sort of just the most basic of definitions. And there's a lot of things around that to make that survive. You talked about leadership. You talked about, we'll talk about market. What needs to be in the market to make that? How many consumers need to be there? And the operation model. Well, I'm going way down the rabbit hole, but to make it succeed, it needs to have a certain operation model around it. But to me, it's a scale and a purpose. And the scale has to be beyond 3 or 4, is my opinion, offerings. And the purpose has to be to bring people together, to experience, differentiated offerings. So
I think that's a good summary. I mean, I think there's a lot of different definitions, and I think that we've been talking a lot about pushing those definitions to include other ways. I mean, I personally don't feel like it has to be in one room. It could potentially be the same model can work in a number of interesting ways. But yes, I think that's true. I mean, there are some smaller, small market food halls, what I call them, that have maybe a few offerings around, like a really cool bar, and maybe it's got a stage or something. I love that idea, and I think that it's I wouldn't necessarily call it a food hall, but it's darn close, and I think that it can operate in the same sort of model and setup. But as we talk about that, let's get right into kind of the list of the issues. As I said, there's the structural problems really begin with the economic difficulty of making these deals work. As I wrote in the article, traditionally, most of the food halls that have worked well, anyway, from a financial perspective, are ones that are in urban markets with a huge amount of foot traffic. And those markets also mean that it costs an exorbitant amount of dollars to make that project happen. Having done a bunch of budgets for them, Herb and I worked on some together, and I've done an awful lot of budgeting and design work for projects that did and did not happen. But that's some of the biggest takeaways are what drives the model is often economics, which I want you to respond to this as well, Herb, because it drove me absolutely insane working with developers and trying to get to a financial model that worked for both operators that are going to be in the business, us who were a potential operator running it, whether it was me or another group I was with or another entity, as well as making it work financially for the landlords. A very hard combination to make those three things happen. What I found, a couple of things I found takeaways were the amount of food service required was a matter of how to cover the nut for, say, how to cover that investment and make the investment work, as opposed to really looking at it from what can we expect this market to actually support. When you it's been interesting to me how I'll immediately go to the how many people question it takes to get through the door to make your model work at the beginning of a conversation. Because Herb, you probably get a lot of this. I do. Hey, can we put a food hall in here? We've done some sketching and we put 35 operators in here, and boy, and I go, wow, there's 10 seats, and how many people are in this neighborhood? They don't even know the answers to these questions.
Yeah. So I think you're spot on again, and there's many different tangents to take there. One is, you and I have been educating the real estate community for 5 or 10 years now that the answer to vacant space is not a food hall. That's just not. They come along and say, "Oh, I've got 20,000 square feet. We'll do a food hall," because everybody wants food. And the reality is, to your point, is the market there to support it? What's how many of the touch points that we can get in there? And the reality is, the business model really it stinks. It's like the margins are so low on culinary development and operations of a restaurant, if you will. And these are small restaurants, so the margins are so tight and the expenses are so great. It's the ratio that's the greatest opportunity to fail is food and beverage operations. I mean, because they're so complex to design, build, develop, get a return on that investment. And then you've got a margin of a restaurant, which is the tightest retail operation you can have. So you layer into that, the landlord's expectation of return on their investment. You layer onto that the operator's return, and then you need a marketplace that'll work. A density, like you said, day parts. We're getting talking about, can you get 3 day parts and breakfast? Can you get 4? Breakfast, lunch, dinner, or afternoon, dinner, evening, 5. You can't. We've experienced this. It's real, or not. You can't. It's hard to. I'm going.
It hasn't been done yet.
Yeah,
I think is the answer to that. I mean, I can't think of an example. I believe it might be possible, but I think to your point, you've got to define what it is what are you trying to do here, and does that make economic sense?
Yeah, and then you look at the few that are really successful, and you go, aha, of course, the market's there. You've got the daytime population, the afternoon evening population. So it's easy to look at examples that are exceeding New York City, if you will, downtown LA here. Right. But then can you take that to Austin, Texas? I don't know, probably, but how many can you build there?
Right.
What's the scaling going to be? So I'm veering off the original conversation, but yes, it's economically, it's a difficult proposition.
Yeah, well, I think you just touched on a number of the economic difficulties, and we can spend a lot of time on this because it's probably the most important one to understand, is that there are different ways to view it, and there's different end results needed based on what a landlord's need is. If that food hall is a vibrant part of their of a larger development that needs that as part of to make the thing vibrant that they want, then that has to be into you've got to factor that into the economic model that they're hoping to achieve. You cannot place the square footage rent factor on that you can in a traditional retail or restaurant, because it just won't work. Flat out will not work. I can prove that in 8 ways till hell, and have done so in numerous ways. And I know you have as well. So there's that. So landlords got to understand that, which a lot of them do. I've had a number of great conversations. We're working on a couple of projects that are kind of out there where folks they understand that food element is part of what they're overall trying to do. So it's a difficult thing. But I don't know about you, Herb, but I try to get to that economic piece just really quickly with somebody to make sure that, because the call is, hey, can we or should we do a food hall here? Let's get to basic economics real quickly to determine if this, has any, will in any way meet what you're thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things to consider in the conversation I elevate all the time is whoever owns that space and is looking for some return out of that space, what's its ancillary, effect on the rest of the environment? And you and I did a fabulous project, I believe, in Houston, and in speaking to the ownership of that entity, but also the ownership of the local community right around it, the couple of buildings that are right around it, it raised the rents literally. So when you think about 600,000 square feet of a tower, raising its 10 cents per square foot, the return on that value would take care of any profit you wanted out of the food hall space. It could be a break-even opportunity, but drives so much in the amenity to the community around. Maybe it's a viable option, but your pro forma has to be on a larger scale and looking at something much larger than just the 20,000 square feet or 40,000 square feet.
Yeah. I mean, you're exactly right. I mean, because if you're looking at it that way, it might work. You pointed. If you look at some extreme examples where you've got the foot traffic to support, that kind of sales level, maybe it would on its own. Outside of the couple that we modeled that were in really high traffic areas, I can't really think of one that wasn't going to be a tough hill to climb, to get there. And there's a lot to go into on that. I think we probably got to move on to some of the other aspects, and then we can certainly be available to talk about that in more detail. I had a kind of a bucket of other inherent problems, and I don't want to spend a huge amount of time on each one of them because we're trying to limit our call time today. But some of them, were really amplified, obviously, by current difficulties in the food service industry in general, with the focus to off-premise, which was something that you and I probably talked about. I don't know. I know it was on my mind a couple of years ago. I feel like I should have stood on a soapbox and said, wait a minute, we got to make sure that we're addressing what the rest of the industry is, which is technology, as the first major piece. Everyone has had a huge struggle with that, and there's a bunch of reasons why, and any of the operators that are listening will know that. But really, if you were going to do a food hall right now, there is no way I would do one without having one solid system that was shared throughout the entire facility. The interesting thing about this, and maybe technology people could tell me whether I'm wrong or right, there was a lot of research done by some folks I know about which technology platform should be used, and they chose one that I believe it was largely because it was trying to segment the information between the vendors, and had a system been adopted that basically would have been more transparent to the entire facility, say, food stall A can see everybody's sales throughout, all of a sudden those are systems that are already exist and can be built upon, whereas ones that try to basically treat the entire restaurant as the entire facility as one restaurant, but segment the information, then seem to completely fall apart.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know anything about that topic, but
I will be transparent. I'm not as far into the technology, if you will, but I know from an operating model, it just creates a challenge. And then, how do you help and mentor, in getting maybe some of the things Andrew are going to talk about, but how do you help, identify each one, the success of each one, why they're succeeding through one general, reporting system, so that we can help elevate the coffee program if that's something that's being challenged. And how can we, as master operators, we'll get into the operating models too, but how can, let's just say we're, advisors or investors in this thing, how can we help our clientele, which is really the food operators, elevate themselves? And it all comes down to the technology, if you will, and the reporting and how you get information out of that. And it's, Andy you and I have done this a lot. Is there really a successful, there's a process you and I have thought about and laid out, but can we successfully do that and operationally, do that?
Yeah.
So.
I think that's probably the next, you just touched on it, which is, the mentorship piece and the support of the operators has a number of components to it. There's culinary mentorship, there's leadership mentorship, there's business acumen, mentorship that needs to have just basic day-to-day operations. These are all things that those same, when I said earlier about what's the awesomest food service vendor in a food hall, there's a couple different schools of thought on that. You might have someone who's a little more sophisticated, who has some of that business acumen within their small company, but likely you're going to run into a bunch of people that have unique culinary talent, but don't necessarily have all that. I believe that the opportunity exists for a food hall operator, as whether that's done through an operating agreement or a licensee or however the deal structure works, to provide a much higher level of service and support to the operators. That's why Andrew is basically here today as well. And while he hasn't done food hall work, he's an expert at providing that kind of support to people. Do you see that, Andrew, in how, when you go to a food hall, obviously there's a bunch of operators going on. From the inside, I can tell you that they're kind of just coming up with, some of them use their grandma's recipes and they're amazing. But when I go down the rabbit hole of asking them, hey, tell me about your costs and your processes, and can you deliver this product? What are your ticket time goals? And it's like, to some extent.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I think it's true not just with food halls. I think it's true with traditional food service models as well. And oftentimes more established models or businesses than you would imagine don't have a lot of those systems in place. But I think when you think about food halls, you want to, and this idea of mentorship, I really think it starts with the curating or the selection of not just the chefs, but what kinds of businesses do you want to have in your hall? I really like the Reading market, the Reading terminal market in Philly. And the reason that I do is that, earlier one of you talked about day parts. There's a produce market in there. There's a counter that makes got to be some of the best breakfast in Philadelphia. And then there's a guy who's doing some different kinds of rotisserie meats that are really sophisticated. And so whoever selected or curated that hall did a really nice job of thinking about, whether they intended to or not, they really did a beautiful job thinking about day parts and who would be busier at different times. There's also some just gorgeous seafood in there, et cetera. So inherent in their model, they're going to get chefs and restaurateurs coming in to buy seafood and produce. They're going to get consumers who are looking for fine ingredients, et cetera. And then there's there are some little shops that are little Vietnamese shops or what have you that are selling funky ingredients and so forth. So they did a beautiful job, and I can't put my finger on it, but I think Philly has this really, really unique perspective and voice on Italian food, and that's all present there as well. And so that leads into, if I'm going to have a food hall, is there an over, and this is a question that I think operators need to ask themselves, am I just going to put together an assemblage of people that express interest, or am I going to try to create an experience that a lot of different people will be interested in at a lot of different times of the day? And they don't all have to be serving sandwiches and salads or, interesting kinds of food to go. They can be little kitchen shops that are selling gadgets. They can be like the Vietnamese vendor that I mentioned that has, all different kinds of fish sauces, etc. But I think also you're going to attract small business operators who might not have a lot of experience. And here's where the mentors in running their own business, maybe they were successful working for someone else and they thought it was time to branch out on their own. And so they're going to need the mentorship. They might have a great idea, but how do we package it? And I don't really mean the box or the tray that it goes on, but how do we define it, the scope of it? It goes to the equipment, et cetera. And how do we think about the financials so that people make money? I think that the developers that are hopefully in the audience have to realize that in order for the developer to be profitable and for the food hall to have long-term profitability and be vibrant, those operators need to be profitable as well. And you want to create some tenureship in your food halls. As a consumer, I don't want to keep going. I don't want to go back and keep seeing vacant and new stalls. I want to figure out a way. And I've seen some models that are working where you sign a commitment and it's a two-way commitment. The operator commits to being there for 3 years, but then there's something in return, so they're not hung out to dry, sort of thing.
Yeah, you touched on a bunch of things. The first of all, I'm going to respond to that curation piece, which is a tough topic, as well, because everybody and the Reading Market example that you gave is a good one, because that evolved, that place over a long period of time. And Herb, I know you've heard this because I have. Those and some of the other kind of classic environments are what kind of spurred, in my opinion, the food hall craze. People were looking to those environments saying, hey, how can we recreate that? Can we get, a fishmonger like the guys in Seattle, and kind of, can we get all those things? Now, all those people may exist, they may not in certain communities, and the location has to support that back as we went to it. Or maybe there's different ways to look at it. In one area, the Reading Market kind of model might make excellent sense. In another, it might be a mixture of other things. It might be entertainment options. It might be other things that would, depending on the market around it. We were working on one that was in a kind of a semi-urban market that had a lot of young people in the area. They were looking for nighttime things because this particular area didn't have any. So the thought was, okay, develop a food hall that also has the ability to offer those things. But I think that the curation has to be very site specific. And then your points about supporting operationally has to start with the menu, making sure that the menus work, they're profitable, they can deliver it, that their processes make sense. I know from watching you do it so well that, taking someone's idea of a product and turning it into something that's actually profitable and can be executed by the kind of staff they have, which is different, right? I mean, there are different types of staff and different food stalls even. One of my favorite food stalls operators that was in the project in Houston was a Korean operator who was using their kind of grandma's recipes, and he's a culinary trained guy, and the kind of family operation running it. They do an excellent job. However, would have really benefited from working with operations folks and culinary folks on making sure that their profitability and executability was there, which is to that mentorship piece. I have a belief that it's actually possible to engage the operators on site to a level that I don't think I've seen at any food halls, and I could be wrong. There may be a food hall operator that does an amazing job, but I haven't seen it yet, or talked to operators who felt like they experienced it.
Yeah, I think one thing you'll find amongst the three of us, even though we have much different kind of tracks and backgrounds, is there's a passion for the operator. There's a passion for the success of the operator, and when you look at a food culinary collection environment, there are many different audience, many people that have to be rewarded. One, the guy or gal who owns the space, the landlord, if you will. But they don't have the direction. They don't all have the mindset in, what's good for my tenant, what's good for my operator. I want my rent, out of the space,
right.
And I want to create amenity in the building. And then you have, the audience of the consumer. That's who really drives the demand. We have to all understand. You were going down that path, Andy and Andrew. You have to understand who wants to be there and why is it there. Reading Market is a marvelous example, and it's a transportation hub. It's right where people come and go in the morning and the evening. So it makes sense to have the butcher there. It makes sense to have the fish person and the flower stall there. So, but back to our point, we're passionate about, because if they succeed, if the taqueria succeeds, then everybody's happy, and everybody works. But it's hard. The margin's so low. Everybody's got their hand in that person's pocket. So by mentoring through Andrew and Andy, you helping these people run successful businesses and get the metrics in place, get the supply in place, help them understand how to get revenue out of these small spaces is critical. It's just critical to how these operate.
Yeah.
So
I'm gonna. You said something earlier, and I think Andrew touched on it as well, which is the analytics aspect of this. Which we go back to the technology piece. The technology has to be there in order to analyze the analytics of what's happening in the facility, make adjustments to the offerings, see what people are buying, what they're not buying, what works, what doesn't. And analyze those. I'm no analytics expert, but luckily I know some people who really are, and they come up with just absolutely things I would never even have considered. I mean, it's the level of analytics that you see at truly dialed in, restaurant companies, usually when they have a lot more sophistication, or they're just smart enough to bring in that aspect. But that person definitely needs that group, definitely needs to be on the team. And Andrew, I know you know who I'm talking about. Someone like Mike Lukianoff has got to be there. He's a guy we know who is just an absolute genius at analytics and analyzing these things. That has to be something that's just constantly analyzed. And again, I could be totally wrong. I know that there are some food hall operators that kind of have their hands more on what's working. But I've talked to an awful lot of them that basically just get sales reports. And I understand that, because what are they going to do with that information if they don't have an infrastructure to respond to it?
Yeah.
One of the other kind of, and there's a few other buckets I guess I want to touch on of kind of inherent problems that I wrote in the article. We talked about multiple day parts already, and I think that's also that is part of the definition of what the project is. Where is it? Does it, what would work there and what doesn't? I don't know that there's certainly no model you can look to say, hey, this is exactly what will work. I mean, that's why entrepreneurs and thought people who can think big come up with ideas. Nobody knew that you could sell a $4 coffee before Starbucks decided to tell everyone they could, is the one that everybody uses, and it's a good one. So you have to really approach it that way. What is the overall vision for this property? And I always kind of start out with that question. If someone can articulate it, then they've thought about what they're trying to achieve. Does that make sense to you, Herb?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and where my head goes is we were fortunate enough to be involved in a culinary environment in a traditional mall setting, enclosed mall setting. So it was a food court. I mean, it was, but elevated, and we wanted it to be an amenity and experience. And it had to address who else was in that. It's a luxury mall. I mean, A plus high end, the highest stores I can afford, if you will. So, what's the audience and what's driving that, and what are the day parts, to your where the avenue you were going versus, the reading market, or for you, if you will, Andy. I think you're still working on one in local Washington D.C. where it's on the metro station. So what is driving the demand of the people that are coming to that, and how do we differentiate the audiences, design the space to reward that, and then curate the right operators, to deliver on that throughout the portion of the day. And then it's really important, as you started, I think, to say, is to drag that program out. So how do you create an amazing offering in the morning, this great coffee, environment, but then drag that out into the day part to have something that comes out of there in the mid-afternoon, and then have a bar, if you will, that takes you into the happy hour and later end. So how do you curate appropriately to have length of stay in those environments? And I'm not sure I was hitting on the topic that you were going to, but that's what came to mind.
No, I think that's awesome, because the topic, one of the topics was the ability to serve multiple day points. It's kind of what you're talking about, which is, there's a bunch of things, in my opinion, that go into that. I mean, there's the design of the facility is a huge aspect of that. What the community around it actually is, what do they want, so that you're clear about what you're trying to do. It'd be really dumb to build a food hall in a downtown environment that had, some, trying to do a dinner, kind of focused place. While it might, be sexy, it's probably not going to really work at its peak, which is going to be that lunchtime peak, which is what, most food halls are geared toward. So if you're going to keep it away, turn it away from that, make sure that you're doing it effectively. We've been working on some projects that we hope will do that, and they're kind of design things that we're trying to accomplish to make that happen. A mixture of how it's put together and how it's set up to hopefully do that. But the jury's kind of out on it. I can't really point to any. I don't know if you can, but point to any is that they really nailed it at that location to kind of get the 4 or 5 day parts.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Andrew, you started opening up. Go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, I can't help but I'm looking at Andy and seeing his shirt. All I can really see is discipline. And so I'm thinking about that word discipline, and that concept, and what we're talking about really requires, maybe before you get to the discipline, imagination, creativity, these different things. What do we envision our food hall to be? How does it serve the community? How does it serve the developer and the tenants and that sort of thing? But then once you're past that, it requires discipline to put it into action and to stay true to what that vision is or was. And so I don't know. I think, what does it say? Discipline through freedom creates
freedom. Yeah.
Equals freedom. And so on one hand, that's a kind of a confusing statement. But I think I can also create in my head where that if you have this discipline of vision, or discipline in executing your vision, now you have this freedom to be successful. And I don't know if that's what it means, but that's kind of what.
That is what it means, basically. I mean, it's some more stuff to it, but yeah, that's totally, that's spot on. Having discipline provides you with the freedom to do great things.
Yeah. So we could go on about how that affects mentorship, but I think that it could be sort of the thesis statement of what a successful management of a food hall is.
Mm-hmm.
Where that takes me, Andrew, is just real quickly, Andy. The easy out for a real estate community is to jump in and put not to speak ill of national brands, but to put national operators into some of these spots,
Right.
maybe to create buzz, create jaw. And I think that's okay in certain instances because it creates a sort of validity to this environment and allows other more independents to operate well. But if you have the discipline to stick to the vision, to understand what really is unique about these culinary environments and brings individuals together, and you can stick with a good mentorship community to within the operations to drive them to be better, to get that great taqueria to come out of their basement, out of their food truck, out of somebody else's kitchen, sous chef or whatever it might be in your language, to create something themselves and allow them really to flourish, incubate them. These could be really great places, could be really phenomenal for the consumer, for the operator, and for the ownership. But you have to have the discipline to allow that vision and creativity to carry through, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the final, the third point. We covered kind of the food halls are awesome, but they have some structural problems. Then a number of what those problems are, and then there's a couple more that we didn't really hit on, but I don't want to get into. There's other opportunities within how the food hall operates itself. But really the point of it all comes down to all of those things are true, but they take a level of leadership to enact them that is frankly very difficult. This isn't being able to operate a food hall at a higher level is going to take people who have clear vision for what they're trying to accomplish, the acumen to execute it properly, the discipline, as Andrew said, to continue working it, working the problems, working the solutions to have it happen. And I'm sure that there are some out there. I guess if we go back to the urban environment for just a second, say, okay, if you're lucky enough to have a property that has so much foot traffic going by and walking through, you can probably get away with kind of leasing spaces throughout the facility and kind of being a traditional landlord, maybe being more hands off and kind of letting it go. One step up from that might be a market that needs a lot more promotion, but generally you can get the people to go there if you promote it very well and you have great social media people involved. But my experience and looking at the economics of most of these would tell you that in order for it to really work, it needs to go to an entirely another, a much higher level of execution to make it really work. And I think that if it were my money opening a food, I would definitely seek out operator, probably an operating partner who could, at the very least, do kind of oversight of the operation. If they didn't need, and it's really based on how much how much funds are happening or how much sales are taking place and what they can afford. But having the right amount of oversight operationally, mentorship wise first, second, promotions, third, all of those other factors that we talked about, trying to build the sales to a place where the economic model works. And I think that's going to be the tough part.
So how do you guys think about sort of our new reality with the pandemic, and we're in this situation where it's real, it's prevalent, all the operators that I know are being forced to rethink how they do business. How does a food hall function in this environment? In some ways, it feels to me like it could be a great environment, not a great environment, but a food hall could be a reasonable business to think about because it's inherently either outside or high ceilings with a lot of movement and traffic and airflow and so forth. So I don't know, is a food hall something that is a new way of thinking about food service in a pandemic? Just my own personal opinion is that even when sort of the emergency of the pandemic subsides, we're going to be functioning differently to some degree as a society in terms of how we interact, et cetera.
Herb, I'm gonna let you hit that one first. I got some thoughts.
Well, where my head jumps to is sort of maybe a missed opportunity, and it's pre-pandemic, Andrew. I see these collection of operators missing the chance. Andy wrote some of this in his article to have offsite consumption, and it's such a wonderful collaborative if you can think about the way people in young families eat today. I'm a little beyond that. My kids are a little older, but Jake wanted the hot dog, Harley wanted the veggie salad, I wanted a slice of pizza, and so forth. So, and this gets back to technology too, but there is a solution baked in there where you can reward a lot of different people through this one, collection. And it's not necessarily, Andrew, you were going down the physical space a little bit more, but I'm going down to what's the offering. And there's a baked in, missed opportunity there, in my opinion, let's see, cater in a mixed environment. If somebody could organize that, pulling from your greatest offering in the, empanada to somebody else's, offering with pizza or whatever it might be, and then back that up with another great program. So I'm going on and on. There are missed opportunities with the inherent talents in a food collection that could leverage technology, could leverage the intellectual property we have to make more successful transactions. And we're seeing getting back to the pandemic is forcing people who never did offsite sales or it was a small portion of the bottom line. It's huge now. And how do we jump into that business? How do food halls jump into that business? Because we should leverage them. If I owned 10 of them, I'd be figuring it out, a year ago, how to leverage on that pre-pandemic. So anyway, Andy, I don't know if that took us in a direction, but that's what I'm thinking.
No, I think that's exactly correct. I think Andrew touched on a bunch of things, but food halls are not set up for the new reality. The premise that when I started out writing that article, it was I think one day I read somewhere that somebody said, oh well, food halls are well positioned to endure this because they have open spaces. But that's really a complete misnomer. I mean, one of the biggest problems in a food hall is a lack of seating, right? And it's the lack of seating is there because the economics drove so many fucking food stalls that had to be there that it doesn't work, so there's no place to sit. And if there is, they're close together. Social distancing is that's a fantasy at most food halls. I mean, again, what makes a food hall awesome is that vibrancy and closeness. And I mean, Reading, I got a picture of Reading up on my other screen here. It's awesome because it's all these close little environments, and there's no way you could, function that way. So I think if you're thinking about food halls that need to evolve now, that they need to be set up right from the outset, with that technology that allows it to happen, the involvement of someone like you that can help make them craft menus that work, for off-premise. Everything doesn't work for off-premise. Don't sell somebody something that doesn't travel well. They need that overarching guidance to create that both off from a delivery standpoint and catering, all of those things. We've got the whole third party thing going on with that, which is, currently is a thing that just has to be dealt with. While it may change and there may be a co-op that you can get into or other things that are developing with that, or you do it yourself, which was a pretty ambitious thought that a group that I worked with was going to do. I still think that makes a ton of sense, especially in an urban market to do delivery yourself. But I think all of those things have to be, kind of looked at the same time. I was talking to an operator yesterday. Their sales are now, like everybody, I guess, 70% off premise because they have, no interior space. So I get, you can say it's 100% at that point, right? Because there's no one inside or very few. But yeah, I mean, you need to evaluate that and make it part of the physical space, the mental space of responding to it, and the ability to craft a program like you were going to do if it was one restaurant. What I would do, Andrew, is challenge you to work with the operators to come up with a program that worked for the entire facility, along with the technology experts and the analytics folks that can back it up and guide what takes place going further.
Yeah, I think to your point, Andy, where I started to think about things too is the mentorship is so critical because these are artists. I don't think a lot of people understand, and the three of us have dealt with those purveyors regularly. They're artists. I mean, if they're good at their craft, and yet they don't necessarily think about, I don't want to eat a French dip, in the middle of my workday or whatever. I'm not picking the right thing. There's something that's hand food or not easy to grab and eat. And not only that, to what direct thing you just said, you can't offer your entire menu. It has to be simple, quick, palatable, right in that timely fashion. Has to be able to travel 20 minutes, and sit in a bag or a box, in many cases. So I'm just reiterating what you said, but the point I want to make is, I don't think the general consumer out there understands that the guy or gal making the empanadas is an artist. They really are, and if they're good at their work, they're artists. And you have to take that they're unique and customer to us. You have to take that into consideration through the business model and what they're offering and so forth. So that's what I was thinking.
You just said something that was real interesting. The fact that they are artisans, which is what when you talk to a lot of developers, their genius side comes out and they say, you know what, I'd really like to be part of offering opportunities for people to create new businesses. I'd love to be able to mentor and help a young chef or a person who's young or old that wants to get into food service and mentor them and provide them with the opportunity to succeed to make that happen. And a lot of them say that to me, and I'm sure they do to you as well, Herb, when you're talking to them about, hey, we're in this, we want to be that launch point, we want to be that that place where people get a head start and get started. I think that's a great thought. But if you're not, in order to do that, you have to then teach that artisan how to run a business, right? And that's where it becomes, again, it becomes difficult. It takes the right leadership to make that happen with the right team that has those skills to turn that into a success.
Yeah, it's amazing to me that the explosion of this phenomena of food hall. And yet, Andy, I think this goes along to what you're great at, is that there's just a limited group of people that know how to pull those things together. And landlords needs, or real estate community needs to know, they need to hire consultants like yourself, Andy, and Andrew, your collection to make these run appropriately. Because there's a real void in the marketplace for that. I as a designer and less of an operator, are looking for partners like that to bring in, because I have a lot of my clientele saying, I want to do this here, and I see a ripe environment at least for something like that. But there's no facilitator, if you will.
Yeah.
All those things you're talking about. So it's a void.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to pretend to say that I know all the answers, other than I feel like I know the direction from watching it fail and not, and working through the economics of a number of these deals, and I know we have folks that can provide those services. So to me, it seems like applying the lessons learned from both chain management and the innovative piece of looking at these kind of projects differently. We're looking at some new projects now that are, what I might consider a small market food hall. I get a lot of requests from people in a small town. It might be Winston, North Carolina, or wherever, and say, hey, we've got this cool property. Does it work? So now kind of approaching it of, okay, let's look at what would work here. How can we incorporate the right technologies as well as the ability to do a huge amount of off-premise sales, which is probably one of the harder things, to address. Andrew and I looked at recently, we worked on a design of kind of an outdoor facility. I don't think I've shown this to you yet, Herb, but it's got basically a giant patio with a couple of concepts surrounding it. I had kind of a drive-through put around the whole thing. And Andrew looked at it in 1 second and said, well, you need to have one drive-through, not three, because I had three for different operators. I said, yep, you're right. And I said, in my head, it went to, okay, that's going to be hard, right? Because you got to get these we were still thinking of independent operators that, whomever they are. Andrew was like, well, look, we can figure that out. We'll make that process work by operationally teaching them we'll build that process right into it. So even if it doesn't matter what kind of food one of the operators we're doing, the functionality of the space would allow it. So you could literally have a drive-through with 3 or 4 different operators on it. I don't know that anybody's done that, but I think we can do it. I think we can.
Yeah. It's an exciting time to really take something that has, again, gained great popularity but has very little direction. And by the way, I don't think it's gotten any better. I was on a panel a year ago, and a panel 2 years ago, and a panel 3 years ago, and the same topics are being discussed over and over. We got jammed up 6, 8, 7 months ago by what's happening in the world culture today, but the issues and challenges still are there. They're all, and they need consultants like you two gentlemen to help figure that out. And not to play salesman or pump this little discussion up, but really the real estate and operation community needs third-party help here.
They do. I mean, and they need design help from folks like your group that have the understanding of how to look at them differently as well, that can function along with operators and consultants that can create an end product that works as a whole. You can't hire a design firm to create a project. You need to hire a design firm that works with the other principals and stakeholders to create something that actually matters and works.
Well, thanks for that, Andy. I'd tell everybody, it's kind of a hard thing to say as an architect designer. Making the space pretty and beautiful is the easy part.
I say that
all the time.
Yeah.
And the operation, getting an operational model together and understanding the audience is the more difficult part.
Yeah. Well, if you think about how complex running a single restaurant is, and then you say, now under one roof, we're going to have 6 or 8 or 32, it just multiplies the complexity. And so, but if you think about it and you have the discipline, Mr. Simpson, at the beginning, I think there's a way of channeling. It's kind of like the drive-through example. There's a way to channel everybody together into some kind of unifying model that helps everybody be successful, keeps competition healthy and real and alive. And so it's complex, but it's just a puzzle. We all solve puzzles every day, and it's just another puzzle, I think, to try to piece together.
Yeah. That's a really good way to close out. I think it's a puzzle that has that can go together in different ways based on the different markets that it's in, or a potential way to look at something can be looked at differently based on its area and its market and how to put it together. They all are going to require the leadership we've talked about on and on and on, which I think that was the biggest point I was trying to make in all of this is while there's problems, there are solutions that can be done, and it's all relied on finding the right leadership to do it. To close that out, I'd love to, anyone who has questions or wants to talk about ideas, I love to just talk about these kind of things. I'll pretty much talk to anybody who wants to call and have a talk about it. I know Herb and Andrew feel the same way. So we can definitely have a conversation with anyone who wants to chat about them. A couple of folks that commented on our comment line about what do we think about operator mix in a food hall? Well, I think we covered that. Are we familiar with a couple of folks brought up a couple of different brands, which I am very accustomed, do know, kind of all of those brands that are out there and look at them. I can't say I've been to any in the last 8 months, but very familiar with kind of the operating models. There's probably an operator who's doing an amazing job that I don't know about. So I hate to put a lot of my summary on how operators are not doing a good job in food halls into one bucket, because I'm sure it's not true. But we'll probably get, hopefully I'll find somebody and we can have another conversation where we can bring a food hall operator on. Because really it's the kind of information we need to get to developers that are thinking about doing these projects, is how they need to think about them. And we're certainly not the only option for folks to talk to, but and be happy to introduce you to everyone that I know that has resources as well. I mean, you can reach out to me. We'll put in the show notes, how to reach out to us. Please subscribe to the video channel if you like it. We're having a lot of conversations about this. I'm going to continue with this topic some. We're going to get into some more details maybe. I think it would be real interesting to maybe do a deep dive into a particular project and talk to the operators that are operating it, how that's happened over the last several months, what could be different, and what's worked and what doesn't. And I can think of a few folks that we can reach out to get some food hall operators, as well as folks that are actually running food stalls within projects that work. So thanks so much. We're at an hour right now, and I really appreciate everybody's time. Andrew, always awesome to see you, my brother, and Herb, thanks so much for your time today.
My pleasure, Andy.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.